They had been in lockdown for a while now. It was getting to them. How much longer would it last? How much longer would it go on for? When could they come out? When would it be safe? Sound familiar? Yes, Jesus had burst through the tomb a week ago, but they were still entombed, shut away. Yes, they had had the assurance that Jesus had defeated death and overcome all opposition, but there they were, shut in. And Thomas was with them on that occasion. He hadn't seen Jesus come that first time round a week before on Easter Sunday evening. Not for him what seemed to be flights of fancy and exaggeration, people getting carried away. Not for him the excitement of the women, or even of Peter and some of those other people. He was a down-to-earth guy. He wasn't going to be swept off his feet. Really? You're not going to give me that one? He had what he considered to be well-founded skepticism. Unless I put my hands into his feet, as it were, his side, unless I can see his wounds and I know it's really him, I will not believe. Now, many people today are asking very serious questions about where is God in our present lockdown? Where is God in this COVID-19 emergency? The other day on Any Questions, the Archbishop of York answered the question put to him on the Good Friday edition. Does COVID-19 confirm or weaken belief in God? Well done, Archbishop, for answering that one well. It's a very good question. And there are several ways we can approach this. None of these responses can be allowed to be trite when many we encounter amongst friends and family have the unbearable torture of being unable to be with a loved person who is slipping away. I heard just 2 days ago of a friend of mine who lost her husband on Good Friday, and she wasn't allowed to be with him. This is a wretched time, a dystopian fantasy made flesh, a disaster movie. But as with the problem of suffering generally, of course we immediately start thinking about individual circumstances. Why did God allow this coronavirus or this cancer to strike me, or that family next door, or those health workers on the front line or in the news doing a fantastic job saving others? And of course, God works far above our pay grade, so to speak. He works at a system level that requires higher order thinking. Let's think about this as we ponder where God is. Is he absent? Doubts might well be fueled at this time. First off, it's important to say this. God did not cause COVID-19. Pathogens are jumping the species barrier. SARS, Ebola, and now COVID-19, well, they've all been linked to these wet markets as the origin of outbreaks. What they call zoonotic viruses are transmitted from animals to humans, and sometimes in the opposite direction. Of course, it's not just those wet markets, humans encroaching on an animal's environment or changing the management of animals. Well, those are also contributory factors. But it is where animals are slaughtered in situ for customers that constitute a powerful transmission site. This is what humans have brought on themselves. So that's the first thing to say. Here's the second. Viruses are both good and bad. Most are good for you. Pathogens are not evidence of a system intentionally designed to cause humans disaster and suffering. Viruses are particles so tiny they can't even be seen by an ordinary microscope. You need an electron microscope to see them. They're not actually alive in their own right. They cannot reproduce themselves except by a hijack, taking over a living cell. You could be forgiven for thinking that the only function of a virus is to cause disease. But that's not true. The system helps to produce the variety that is critical for life. Viruses take resistance to disease from one organism to another. Most viruses live in their hosts without causing problems. A pathogen is evidence of something having gone wrong. So could God have shaped a world system of living things without the role that viruses play? It's very difficult to see how. So that's the second point. Viruses are both good and bad. Here's the third point. Is it even the right question to ask, where is God? There's been a strong outbreak of neighbourliness. Mutual help in the community has gone viral, just like love is viral. As with Auschwitz, when the question was put, well, where's God? The response came, where is humanity? At this time, we can see a common humanity come to the fore. We will get through this by drawing together, even when we are apart. God is in those acts of love your neighbour. If we look for God in terms of some disembodied presence above the fray, then we're looking in the wrong place. God doesn't just act or is where the church is, even though we see the church as a special channel for grace. Sparks of grace are everywhere, never to be extinguished. I'm very pleased about that. Kindness is a mirror of God. And that's why the church, incidentally, simply has to take social isolation and loneliness seriously as a strategic issue. We're all linked together, and that's a no-brainer. Fourthly, the emergency shows up the value of people, not only of community. That might sound strange at a time when vicious and non-discriminating pathogens are ripping through society. But even those that seem to have little value, especially those that have little value, are crucial. Our social experience is shaped by the value that society places on us. It has stood out at this present time how that those who keep our country ticking over, the low-income people who go unnoticed, because they seem to matter less. They are the really vital people, the ones doing the crucial jobs we need. We hear sad stories of death and dying without loved ones, and it matters that we need to feel that we matter. If hope is defined by the things that are worth working for, when we emerge from our holes, we need to build a very different value system based on a fresh realization that everyone has a high worth. And lastly, so we've had God did not cause COVID-19. Viruses are good as well as bad. Is it even the right question to ask? The emergency shows up the value of people. And here's a final point to consider. Even at the same time that we can ponder what good can come out of it, it's all very well for the survivors, of course, at the heart of the Christian faith is the message that God comes to embrace the human situation. The cross represents that in full. There is no evidence that Jesus went down with a virus, but it would be surprising if not. God is not above it all. This is why, though the church hasn't been very good at communal lament, to weep with those that weep is the mandate now. We're not above it all either. We're part of this. Which brings us back to Thomas. He knew what the score was. His doubts were not the unthinking reactions of a slow-witted and down-to-earth guy who calls a spade. More than the others, for him, the resurrection had raised the stakes so high. Who was Jesus really? Could Thomas choose faith over doubt and faith over fear? The church is called to be a non-anxious presence at this time, to show what happens when you have Jesus Christ in your world, in your life. Thomas and the others were at a crucial time of transmission. Everything had changed. Familiar patterns of synagogue didn't work anymore. What should the church be and look like now they were no longer a motley crew following Jesus around for 3 years? Buildings are empty now. The church is being redeployed. But in those days, they didn't have any buildings. We can embody what you do when everything is stripped away. We're not holding on to what we have, but we're not going to replicate just what has happened before. It would be a tragedy if we went back to where we were. Dear brothers and sisters, it is when fundamental questions inevitably arise, being with people in their doubts is crucial. Death and darkness could not overpower Jesus. And that has to carry through into an attitude to life. A final thought. Consider this. Thomas emerged with an assurance of irrefutable evidence. He emerged from doubt into a new realization. He believed again, and so can we. The church should learn from this and reinvent itself so as to be highly contagious. Love is viral too. So let us opt for peace and courage, to choose faith, not doubt, and not fear. So may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our God and our Redeemer. Amen.